We're learning the second Sikha of Parshas Vayakhel and Chelek Tezayin on page 434. The Sikha here is a siyum on Masechta Chagige connected to this week's Parsha, and the siyum is also a continuation of a siyum that we learned earlier in Parshas Truma, the fourth Sikha, which the Rebbe said at the same Fabrengen, Chafav Tavshin Lamed Aleph. It's divided here in two Chalakim. In Truma, in this fourth Sikha, was the nigladige part of this Sikha, and here is the continuation that the Rebbe said on the Hemshech of the Gemara, which is more focused on the Inyanim of Chassidus that the Rebbe explained in this Gemara, and the Rebbe will explain also in the Sikha some very fundamental points regarding a person's Aveda in this world, learning Torah and fulfilling mitzvahs, and how they are both creating the Dir B'Tachtainim in this world. A very fundamental Sikha discussing a lot of very important Inyanim. So let's begin. Auf dem Pasuk Vayaz Betzalel es Ha'aron steht im Medrash. So on the Pasuk that Betzalel built the Aron. So the Medrash tells us, B'shah Shama Kadosh Baruch Hu Moshe Asei Mishkan. When the Eibishter came to Moshe and he told him to build a Mishkan, Ba V'amal Betzalel. So he came and gave over the message to Betzalel to build a Mishkan. So Amalai Betzalel said to Moshe Rabbeinu, Ma'wa Mishkan Hazeh. What is this Mishkan that we're building here for? What's its purpose? Amalai. So Moshe Rabbeinu answered him, She Yishre HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shechinase B'Seichai, that the Eibishter, the Shechina, will dwell in the Mishkan. Umelamed LiYisrael Torah, and also the Eibishter will teach the Yidden Torah here. Amalai Betzalel. So Betzalel says to Moshe Rabbeinu, V'heichan HaTorah Nesuna, where in the Mishkan will the Torah be placed? Amalai, Moshe Rabbeinu answers him, Mishanu Eisen es HaMishkan, when we will build a Mishkan, on Eisen Aron. We will also build the Aron, and in the Aron we'll place the Torah. Amalei, so Betzalel says to Moshe Rabbeinu, Rabbeinu Moshe, my teacher Moshe, Ein Kveidah Shel Torah Bekach. This is not the honor of Torah to build first the Mishkan and then later to build the Aron, to place the Torah into the Aron. Ella rather, on Eisen Aron, first we should build the Aron, V'acha Kacha Mishkan, and only afterwards the Mishkan, for the honor of the Torah. To build the Aron first, to place the Torah in there. Fichach, because this is what Betzalel asked for, Zacha Sheyikar al Shmai, he merited that the building of the Aron was on his name, Shenem Avayas Betzalel es Aron, that Betzalel is the one that built the Aron. So this is the Medrash. So the Rebbe says, from the Medrash is mashma, from this Medrash it's clear, or it seems, as the Teichen Inyan HaAron is a bazunde Zach von Ashras HaShchina b'Mishkan, that what the Aron represents, a place for the Torah, is separate from the Mishkan in general. That is which is the Ashras HaShchina, that's in general the Mishkan. And Azai is mashmal Chayre von another Medrash. And so it seems also from a different Medrash, where it says, as nach dem Bayin dem Mishkan, after the Mishkan was built, hat der Eibishter gesagt, the Eibishter says, Tikantem achsanya la'atzmi. You created a place, you built a place as a lodging for myself. Va'achshav tiknu achsanya l'Torah sheteshruya etzli. Now build a place that the Torah should also be there together with me to build the Aron for the Torah. So you see here that there is the place where the Shechina dwells in the Mishkan, and there is a separate thing which is the Aron where the Torah is. Is nit verstandig? So the question here is on this. Hey Nemes, yes, it's true. As their Mokkam Torah is the Aron. The place where they put the Torah, the Luchais and the Torah was in the Aron. Aber Iker Menuchas Vashras Hashchina, but the primary place where the Shechina dwelled and was is the Eichgewen in and durch the Aron, was also in and through the Aron itself. And wie the Ramban is Mevayer, as the Ramban explains regarding the building of the Mishkan, as Iker HaChayfetz b'Mishkan, the main desire of Hashem is the dwelling in the Mishkan. As Mokkim Menuchas Hashchina Shu Aron. So this, the main desire of Hashem is the place where He dwells, where the Shechina rests, which is in the Aron. If so, is Heint wie telt man es voneinander? So how does the Medrash divide these two? As Klal, as HaMishkan v'Mikdash, is Tzli B'Ashras HaShechina. That the Beis HaMikdash, or the Mishkan in general, is for the Shechina to dwell there. And the Aron is Makom HaTorah. And the Aron specifically is the place of Torah. The Aron is also the place where the Shechina dwells, in and through the Aron. So they come together in the same Keli, the Aron. So we'll understand this by first prefacing the following point. The Ashras, Hashchina b'Mishkan, the Ikri Mikdash, the Shechina dwelling in the Mishkan, which is called the Mikdash as well, is angesagt geworden, k'mo shenema v'asu li Mikdash v'shachanti b'seicham. Build me a Mikdash and I will dwell in them. von dem Shinei Aloshen. B'soichai lo nemar ela b'soicham. Because it does not say the term b'soichai, it says b'soicham in them, a plural term. Lernt man up, from here we learn, as das ist verbunden mit der zweiten Inyan, v'shachanti b'soich kol echad ve'echad. That it's not only giving you the mitzvah that the Eibusher will dwell in the Mishkan, but also the fact that the Eibusher dwells within every single Yid. So now the beer von Ashras Hashchine and dem Betoich in dem Mikdash Aprati von jeden Yidden. So first we'll explain here the dwelling of the Shchine in the Toich inside every single Yid, in the Mikdash Aprati every single Yid. And the Rebbe will explain this Ba'arichis, connected to the Siyum of the Gemara in Chagigah. And from there we'll come back to understand how this applies to the Mishkan in general, and the two things that it says here in the Medrash, that the Eibishter dwells in the Mishkan Bechlal, and the fact that the place of the Torah is specifically in the Aron. So what does it say in the end of Masechta Chagigah? We see from Masechta Chagigah, the Gemara there says as follows. Omer Abavo, Omer Abalazar, Talmidei Chachamim, Ein Oil Shel Gehenim Sheletis Behen. The Talmidei Chachamim, the fire of Gehenim has no effect on them. And how do we know this? Kal v'chaymer mel salamandra. This is a kal v'chaymer from a salamander. What's this salamander that we're speaking about here? Uma salamandra shetaildes eishi. This salamander, I'm not sure what this is today. I don't know if this is the salamander that the way it's called today, a salamander. But in the lashon of the Gemara, this salamander is created from fire. After 6 months, a fire that burns a very long time, so this creature comes out of it. That's what Rashi there says, I believe. So this salamander, hasach midama, if a person takes the blood of the salamander and he applies it to his skin, ein oir sheletis by, no fire could affect him. So Talmidei Chachamim, a Talmid Chacham that learns Torah, shekol gufan eish, their entire body is fire. Dichsiv alikay dvarei kaish num Hashem, that the Torah is compared to fire, and a Talmid Chacham learns Torah, so his entire body becomes like fire. Allah has kama v'kama, most definitely the fire of Gehenna will not affect him. So again, if the salamander that comes from fire and its blood, when you apply it, does not get affected by fire, for sure a Talmid Chacham, which his entire body is fire. Amar Reish Lakish, a similar thing Reish Lakish said, Ein Oir Shel Gehenim Sheletis B'Paishi Yisrael. The fire of the Gehenim does not affect even the sinners by Yidden. Kavachaymer min mizbeach hazav, and we learned this with a kavachaymer from the gold mizbeach. Ma mizbeach hazav, just like the gold mizbeach in the Beis Hamikdash, she'ein olav ela ka'oivi dinner zav. It has a plate of a gold which is the thickness of a dinner, of a certain coin. So it has that thick plate on the mizbeach. It's not so thick actually. So Kamishanim, for many years, the fire is burning there, and ein oir sheletis by. The fire did not affect it. The gold still remained intact. By She Yisrael, so the sinners are amongst Yidden, Shemelei mitzvahs kerimai, which are full of mitzvahs like a pomegranate that's full of its seeds. Tichsev kepela charime rekoscha, al tikre rekoscha ele rekonen shabach. That even those that seem to be Paishi Yisrael and they're empty of mitzvahs, but nevertheless, even they are full of seeds of mitzvahs, like a rimain, like a pomegranate. Allah has kama v'kama, most definitely that those mitzvahs protect them and the fire will not affect them. This is the Gemara, this is the conclusion of Masechta Chagigah. So the Rebbe says, Bepashtas, lernt men, so what's the simple pshat here? As the Shaykhis from the zwei members is, the connection of these two statements from Rabbi Vayakhel and Reish Lakish is, Behemshech zu die Sugya Frie. This is continuing to the Gemara earlier, was red wegen dem Zippui von dem Mizbechais. It speaks about the plate that the war on both the Mizbeach inside, the Mizbeach Hazav and the Mizbeach Anachayches. Werd abgebracht, so in connection to this, the Gemara brings the memre von Reish Lakish, the statement where Reish Lakish says, as ein Oir Shel Gehenim Sheletis B'Paishi Yisrael, that the fire of Gehenim does not affect even the sinners in Israel. Kavachaymer min Mizbeach Hazav. And it's learned from the gold Mizbeach, where the Gemara just spoke about before. Was the Adgashe is in them, the emphasis here was their Mizbeach is given mit Supizov. This Mizbeach was plated with gold. That's what it spoke about in the Gemara before. So since it mentions about the plate on the Mizbeach, werd gebracht frier de memre von Abavo, was red wegen dem, as ein Oir Shel Gehenim Sheletis and Talmid Chacham. So since Reish Lakish is saying something about the fact that we learn from the plate on the Mizbeach that it doesn't affect the Paishi Yisrael, so it also brings what Rabbi Vayakhel said, a similar thing about the fire of a Gehenim not affecting a Talmid Chacham. That's the simple pshat of this Gemara here. However, according to this, is aber nicht verstandig. It's not understood as follows. Aleph, if so, oi bazoi hat doch frie gedacht kommen die Memre von Rish Lakish, kavachaymer mit Mizbeach Hazav. First, the Gemara should bring the statement of Rish Lakish. He's learning out from the Mizbeach Hazav, which is what the Gemara spoke about before, the plate of the Mizbeach Hazav. Und erst danach, the Memre von Rabbi beniget Talmid Chacham. And only afterwards, the Gemara could bring another statement in connection to this from Rabbi regarding the fact that the fire does not affect the Talmid Chacham. The statement of Rabbi itself, he's learning from a salamandra, doesn't have a direct connection to the subject the Gemara was speaking about before. It was speaking about the Mizbachais, the plate and the Mizbeach. So that should come second, only after it brings Rish Lakish, which tells you that you learn out from the Mizbeach Hazav that we spoke about before. Beis, another question here is, Iker Asugya Vegen Paishi Yisrael. The main place where the Gemara discusses at length this subject of the sinners amongst Yidden in Shaykhis to Shlitas Gehenim, and it speaks about the Gehenim that they, whether the Gehenim has an effect on them or not, or Ven Gehenim B'chlal. A whole sugya regarding Gehenim in general is a Masech Erevin. This is a Gemara in Erevin. Was dort werd euch gebracht die Memre von Rish Lakish, and there it's also quoted the statement of Rish Lakish as Paishi Yisrael ein Ershal Gehenim Shaletis Ben Chulu, that the sinners in Yidden, the Gehenim does not have an effect on them. So that's the main place where this is all discussed. So if that's the main sugya there, hat doch die Gemara gedacht dorten bringen, euch die Memre von Rabbi. The Gemara there should have quoted the statement of Rabbi as well, that Talmidei Chachamim ein Ershal Gehenim Shaletis Ben. That Talmidei Chachamim, the fire of Gehenim does not affect them. Varom, Aleph, number one, dorten is the Ikar HaSugya B'Yinzeh. That's the main place where the Gemara discusses this matter. That Kegen and Chagiga is no b'derech hagav. Here it's only being brought as a side note in continuation to the fact that I happen to have mentioned about a Mizbeach, so therefore brings up the plate of a Mizbeach that we could learn regarding the fire that doesn't get affected. That the fire that is does not affect the golden plate. And Beis, another point is Masechta Erevin is far Masechta Chagiga. Masechta Erevin comes before Masechta Chagiga. Chagiga is the last Masechta of Seder Mayid. Masechta Erevin is much earlier on, so it should have been brought over there. Why does the Gemara wait to bring it until over here in Masechta Chagiga? Gimel, another question over here is, Das was Rish Lakish sagt. What is Rish Lakish saying here? Kavachaymer me Mizbeach Hazav. We learn out from the gold Mizbeach she'ein olav ala ka'evi dinner zav. It has a plate which is thick like a dinner of gold. Ein nar shaletis by, and the fire did not affect it. Is l'chayre a hadgasha hafchis from the oisfir from the Gemara Friya. This seems to be something that we're emphasizing, opposite point of what the Gemara said before. What did it say earlier in the Gemara? As leite Rabbanon, so before the Gemara said regarding the plate on the Mizbeach, as mivtol batel tzipuyan gabayim, that plate of the Mizbeach is insignificant, and therefore the Gemara there is talking about the halacha of tumah, whether the Mizbeach could get affected by any tumah, and the Gemara there says that the plate that there is on the Mizbeach is completely batel, and therefore the Mizbeach is not considered to be a gold Mizbeach, it's a wooden Mizbeach. That's what the Gemara says before. That sipif Mizbeach and Nechoshes ve'azav is batel to the Mizbechais. The plate on the copper or gold Mizbeach is insignificant, it's batel to the Mizbeach. And the far is the Mizbeach nit mekabel tumah, so therefore it's not mekabel tumah, even though gold would be mekabel tumah, copper would be mekabel tumah, but because it's batel, so therefore it's not mekabel tumah. That's what the Gemara said before. Now, but Rish Lakish, but over here, the statement of Rish Lakish is mudgish. Over here, what is it emphasizing? The starkheit, the strength, heder abitul, the fact that it's not batel, from them tzipizav shalom Mizbeach, of this golden plate, which is that the fire does not affect it. Right? As that Zippui hat sich gehalten und verhit durch seine Starkheit die Keli. That the plate held strong and it protected the Mizbeach bis as ein Or Shaletis by. It protected the Keli of the Mizbeach that no fire was able to affect it at all. So even though, yes, before the Gemara was talking about the plate on the Mizbeach, and now Rish Lakish is learning also out something from the plate on the Mizbeach, but sort of in an opposite way. Before we're trying to point out how insignificant the plate on the Mizbeach is, and here we're pointing out how strong and firm this plate on the Mizbeach is. So how is this connected to what it says before? Euch darf man verstehen, kam mit die Yukim and the Memres von Gemara und Mehem. There are also other specific details which have to be explained in what the Gemara says here. And some of them are as follows. Aleph, number one, the Kal V'chomer from Mizbeach Hazav is the Gemara's document against a Paishi Yisrael. This Kal V'chomer that the Gemara makes from the Mizbeach regarding the sinners amongst Yidden is doch guilty, could be applied b'mekol sheken v'kal v'chomer, even more so b'negetz Talmidei Chachamim, regarding Talmidei Chachamim as well, that the Torah protects them similar to the golden plate in the Mizbeach. As geshein v'dizov lost nitzuk in fire to Mizbeach, just like the gold does not allow any fire to burn the Mizbeach, is oich the Torah. So too the Torah from Talmidei Chachamim lost nitzuk to say the Oishel Gehanim. It doesn't allow the fire of the Gehanim to affect them. So why can't we learn the Kal V'chomer of the Mizbeach Hazal for Talmidei Chachamim as well? Even if there's something negative that they did, and therefore they deserve to be in the Gehanim, the fire of Gehanim should affect them, if not for the schus of Torah that's protecting them. Ist doch nicht verstandig, if so the question is, Aleph, number one, the ganze Memre wegen Talmidei Chachamim, the whole statement that Rabbi Vayakhel says about Talmidei Chachamim is l'chayre ibrik. It's all extra. Varam mekenes hareis lernen b'mekol shekain from them inyan Memre b'negei to Paishi Yisrael. You could learn it out from the same exact statement, and even more so from this statement regarding Paishi Yisrael. If we're saying regarding people that do mitzvahs and they're Paishi Yisrael, that the mitzvahs are going to protect them, similar to the gold and the Mizbeach, how much more so a Talmid Chacham, for sure, he'll be protected through his Torah from the fire of the Gehanim. So why do we need a separate statement that we learn it out from a different source? Beis, another point there, which is difficult to understand, when the Gemara brings Yede Memre Miyochedes wegen Talmid Chacham. When the Gemara brings a special statement regarding what we learn out that a Talmid Chacham is not affected by the fire of Gehanim, Favas darf man haben an ander Kal V'chomer. Why do we need a different source, a different Kal V'chomer to learn it out from? Es ken doch nutzen demselbe Kal V'chomer from Mizbeach. Let's learn it out from the very same Kal V'chomer of the Mizbeach. Even if you want to divide Paishi Yisrael and Talmidei Chachamim, two separate statements, but why not learn it from the same source, from the plate on the Mizbeach? The Kashi wird noch starker. This question is even stronger. Salamandra is a sheretz tame. This salamander is a sheretz, which is impure, or the rakopana machaya, or it's a creature that's not toy. Tafavazom and uplearn and an inyan b'negetz a Talmidei Chachamim. Why should we learn out this subject regarding a Talmid Chacham from a sheretz? From where do we find to learn this out from? From all things in the world, from a sheretz. B'shas mekendes uplearn and from Mizbeach Hazav, was is in Beis HaMikdash. If you can learn this out from the golden Mizbeach that's in the Beis HaMikdash to compare from there to a Talmid Chacham, why are we learning this out from a sheretz? Beis, another question there is, Vibal, does the Talmidei Chachamim, Paishi Yisrael. So the Gemara here is talking both about Talmidei Chachamim and about the sinners amongst Yidden. Gefinnen sich beide in Gehenim for their Averis. They're both in Gehenim for the Averis that they've done. Nor the Oishel Gehanim is in Zainit Shailit. But the fire of Gehanim is not affecting them. But the Mereshten Fall, in the first case, was Zainit Talmidei Chachamim, because the Talmidei Chachamim that's protecting them. But in Zweiten, and in the second case, was Zainit Malay Mitzvahs, because they're full of mitzvahs that protects them. Is Favast Ruft Minzei. So then why are they being referred to in Ershten Fall, nor Talmidei Chachamim? Only in the first case do we refer to him as a Talmid Chacham, and in the zweiten Fall nor Paishi Yisrael, and in the second case we refer to him only as Paishi Yisrael. The Talmidei Chachamim are also Paishi Yisrael, that's why they're in Gehenim, and the Paishi Yisrael are also people that are Mekayim Mitzvahs. So these are both terms that should be used for both of them. Why is it that the Talmid Chacham deserves to be called only a Talmid Chacham, and the Paishi Yisrael deserve to be called only Paishi Yisrael? The Rabbi calls that to understand all of this. So to explain over here why we need the two Kal V'chomers and the difference between them, the connection to the Gemara before. So the Rabbi will give an introduction there and then bring us into understanding a deeper pshat in this Gemara. Der Verbund und Chibur von Yidden mit dem Eibischen. The connection and the attachment of Rabbi Yita Hashem is durch zwei Inyanim, is accomplished in two different things. Durch Limud Torah und durch Kiyam Mitzvahs, through learning Torah and through fulfilling mitzvahs. There's a very big difference in the type of connection that's formed through learning Torah or through the action of fulfilling a mitzvah. At the time when a Yid learns Torah, and the experience of learning is that you understand, you comprehend the concept in your intellect, in your seichel. What happens then is the person becomes unified with the Torah that he learns. In the language, the expression the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, "Ayichud niflo she'ein yichud kamayu," a wondrous unity that there's nothing that compares to this. Where the person becomes totally and completely unified from every side, from every corner, from every angle, completely one with Hashem. What this really means is that when you learn, and this becomes now your understanding and your opinion, so the person himself becomes an entity of Torah. The Torah becomes part and parcel of the person himself. By mitzvahs, on the other hand, the kind of connection that you have when you do a mitzvah, chach, although it's true that durch kiyam mitzvahs vert mekayim mitzvah merkovet zum rotzen elyon. When you fulfill a mitzvah, so you become like a chariot that's subservient and bottled to the will of Hashem, fulfilling what Hashem wants of you. You don't become unified and identified by the mitzvah, like it is in the case of Torah. When you fulfill a mitzvah, so it's an action that you've done, but it doesn't become your opinion. It doesn't become something that now identifies you. It's just an action that you did. So there's a tremendous connection there, a tremendous bittul to Hashem, but not yichud. You don't become unified, and it doesn't identify your mitzias of who you are. This is the point of the difference between the two statements of what Rabbi is focusing on and what Reish Lakish is focusing on. Rabbi is speaking about the advantage that there is by a Yid that learns Torah, the Talmidei Chachamim. Was durch Torah werden die Talmidei Chachamim gufon eish. So the expression that Rabbi uses is when a Talmid Chacham learns Torah, his whole being, his whole body becomes fire. Was eish da meint dvarei ke'eish, that says Torah, meaning his entire being becomes Torah. Sie werden in ganzen miyuchad mit Torah und Elokus. A person that learns Torah, so the Torah enters into the person, you understand it, it's digested in you and becomes part of who you are. Torah becomes your entire entity. Reish Lakish read wegen der Meile von Mitzvahs by Peishi Yisrael. On the other hand, Reish Lakish is focusing on the advantage of fulfilling mitzvahs even by the sinners amongst Yidden. Meleim mitzvahs kiriman, that they are full of mitzvahs like the seeds in a pomegranate. Was chaj durch mitzvahs wird nicht kein yichud von der mitzvah mit Yidden. When a Yid fulfills a mitzvah, it doesn't create this kind of unity. It doesn't identify your whole being when you fulfill the mitzvah. Von deswegen, but nevertheless, zenen sie al kaponim kelim, but nevertheless they're like a vessel that contains meleim mitzvahs. They are full of these mitzvahs that they fulfill. Und the fire is einer shel Gehenim shel etespem, and therefore the fire of Gehenim will not affect them. So they're focusing on the two different things of Torah and mitzvahs, which have a very different kind of impact on the person that learns Torah, where you become completely identified and unified with the Torah that you learn, and the mitzvahs that a person fulfills, that he now contains and has all those mitzvahs in him, and he has a very special connection, and he's bottled to Hashem, he's a keli being bottled, but not that it identifies who he is. Und das ist echt der Diok, Meleim mitzvahs kirimai. And this is also precisely this example of being full of mitzvahs like a pomegranate. Just like it is with a pomegranate. Hagamer is malifun garinen, he's full of the seeds of the pomegranate. Each seed is a separate entity for itself. It's not part and parcel, it's not one piece with the whole fruit of the whole pomegranate. So similar also when it comes to the sinners amongst Yidden that do mitzvahs, Hagams is in Mekayim mitzvahs, even though they fulfill mitzvahs. Is aber nit gufon mitzvahs. The Gemara never says about a person that does mitzvahs that his very body, his very being becomes a mitzvah. Nor melayim mitzvahs kirimain. They become full to contain in them many mitzvahs like the seeds that are inside of a rimain. There we see in this mashal the difference between mitzvahs and Torah. Now, v'yafal pikein, so yet, chotch, Talmidei Chachamim, haben a mile was gufon eish. So Talmidei Chachamim, according to what we are understanding now, are on a higher level. When they learn Torah, the Torah enters into their being and it identifies their very being. So if so, the question becomes, so once I know that even people that just do mitzvahs, the fire of Gehenna will not affect them, how much more so this should be true regarding a Talmid Chacham. I don't need a separate source for that. I should learn it out with a Kavachaymer. So the Rebbe says, no, kemenit up learning, I cannot learn out as ein oyer shel Gehenim shel letes but Talmidei Chachamim from Peishi Yisrael. I can't learn out the fact that the fire of Gehenim does not affect the Talmidei Chachamim from the fact that it does not affect those that do mitzvahs. Warum? The reason is when a Talmid Chacham fall durch in a Dvar Aveda, when a Talmid Chacham stumbles and he does an Aveda, is this mer chomer wie das wird getan von a Peish Yisrael. This is something which is worse than when a person that does not learn Torah and he sins and he falls through in an Aveda. Al derech, this is the expression the Gemara says, Talmidei Chachamim shgagis naslem kisdainis. A Talmid Chacham, when he does an Aveda and it's inadvertently or it's by mistake, so for him, his Avedas that are done b'sheigig are equivalent for someone else that does the Aveda b'mezid premeditated or intentionally, because a Talmid Chacham is held up to a higher standard, because he's a Talmid Chacham, he has more knowledge and he has to be more careful. So therefore the fact that a Talmid Chacham is sinning is something which is much more severe. So we can't learn from a person that's from the Peish Yisrael that does not learn Torah, he's just full of mitzvahs and the Gehenim does not affect him. Not necessarily is that true regarding a Talmid Chacham which is held up to a higher standard. Now on the other hand as well, you can't learn out the Peishi Yisrael that the fire of Gehenim does not affect them from the fact that the fire does not affect the Talmid Chacham. But on Talmidei Chachamim is gufanesh. A Talmid Chacham, when he learns Torah, that identifies his very being. That's why the fire of Gehenim does not affect him. Amayla is nita by Peishi Yisrael. This is an advantage that Peishi Yisrael that fulfill many mitzvahs don't have this Maila. So therefore we need a separate source to explain that the Peishi Yisrael that are full of mitzvahs, the fire of Gehenim does not affect them either. So this explains the two categories that Rabbi was speaking about, Reish Lakish was speaking about, and they can't be learned out from one another, and that's why they're separately bringing sources for this idea that the fire of Gehenim does not affect the Talmid Chacham, and the fact that the fire of Gehenim does not affect the Peishi Yisrael that fulfill mitzvahs. Leitem is eich verstandig. According to this, we could also understand why is it that the Gemara says the source for Talmidei Chachamim that the fire does not affect them? Where do we learn this from? We learn it from a salamander that comes out of a fire. Peishi Yisrael from Mizbeach Hazav. And where do we learn out the idea that Peishi Yisrael are not affected from the fire of the Gehenim? From the Mizbeach Hazav. Salamandra is Teildas Eish. As we said before, Salamandra is a creature that comes from fire. B'dugmas Talmidei Chachamim. In this sense, it's just like a Talmid Chacham was called Gufan Eish, which is also a being that now comes from fire and is a piece of fire. Their mitzias is Torah. Their entire being is all Torah. So with this Kal V'chaimer, learning from specifically this creature, the salamander that comes from fire, Rabbi is also coming to explain and answer the following question. We're speaking about a Talmid Chacham, his entire being, his entire body is fire. So the question is, if his entire being, his entire body is fire, so how is there an Aveda by a Talmid Chacham? And the question on the other hand is, if this is a person that it's possible for him to sin, was the fire in Gehenim, and therefore he's in Gehenim, how could it be that the fire of Gehenim will not affect them and they remain being a whole entity of fire? So the question over here is, if he's a Talmid Chacham, there should be no Avedis. If there are Avedas, so then he's not really a full Talmid Chacham, so then the fire of Gehenna should be able to affect him. If then, from Salamandre was told this Eishi. So the Gemara is bringing you the Kavachaimer from this creature that's born, that comes from fire, and you see over there a similar thing. The Gemara tells us, Iker Tevilusa Benura, that when a person tevils, so the tefillah in this world is in water, in a mikveh. But really, the source of the concept of immersing and teveling is in a fire. The Gemara there talks about the fact that the Eibishter Vayakhel purifies himself and he tevels in a fire. That's the real concept of tefillah. As the Ikra Matar from Tumah is Eish Meri Mayim. Fire purifies a person even more than water. So now seemingly the question here is, so if fire is something that purifies from any impurity, and he removes the impurity, is the kol sheken is how much so definitely as from eish can keep tumen adverin. You would expect that from fire you can't have any impurity that should come out from the fire itself. Zet menobet, but here we see as fun eish verta salamandra asheret tomi akopana machaya. Nevertheless, from fire is created this creature which is a sheret tomi, this salamander. So the fire itself is a source of Tara, it's the main tefillah of a mikveh, and yet it's from here that comes this creature that's impure. That's on one hand. And from the zweite Seite, on the other hand, at the same time, is asach midama von dem salamander. You take the very blood of this salamander itself, is ein orshaletespai. The fire has no effect upon you. That's the unique thing that you see over here regarding the fire and the creature of the fire that's tameh, that comes out from the fire, that's a source of purity. So now this explains, from this we can understand what it means by a Talmid Chacham that's found in the Gehenna. Is the fun move on alachas kama v'kama. From this we understand even more so regarding a Talmid Chacham was called Gufanesh, a Talmid Chacham that learns Torah and his entire being is all fire of Torah. As chach she can zayin the mitzias. It is possible that even a Talmid Chacham where his entire being is Torah, but nevertheless he could fall through in an Aveda. Why? Mitzadem was there neshama gefindt sich beguf basav adam in olam hazeh was resham gavrim by. Even the greatest Talmid Chacham is in a body of flesh and blood, and he's living in this world, which is a world which has rishayim that are very strong in this world. So therefore, it's possible that even a Talmid Chacham that's fire should do an aveda. Von deswegen, but yet bleiben sie noch alt kol gufanesh. It doesn't change who they are; their identity remains a full being of fire. And therefore the fire of Gehenna will not affect them. So this is the Kal V'chaimer that we're learning out from the Salamandra, that the Talmid Chacham on one hand, he's totally pure, fully fire, but nevertheless it is possible, mitzad his gov, that there should be a sin there. And nevertheless, even after he sins, it doesn't change his identity. He remains a piece of fire, and therefore the fire of Gehenna will not affect him. But on the other hand, by Paishi Yisrael, the sinners amongst Yidden is different. Was Malayim mitzvahs. They are full of mitzvahs. Bringt man the Kal V'chaimer from Mizbeach Hazav was his mitzvah Hazav. So for them, we can't bring a Kal V'chaimer from the salamander that comes from the fire, which is a creature of fire, but we bring a Kal V'chaimer from the Mizbeach Hazav, which is only plated with gold. Varom durch mitzvahs vertayid blois mitzupeh. Similar to the way it is by the Mizbeach. So the Mizbeach itself is not gold. The Mizbeach is seemingly only external. It's only a plate, which is really the emphasis of what the Gemara before discussing the Mizbeach focused on. It was saying over there that the tzipui is insignificant. It's just a plate. And by a Yid that fulfills a mitzvah, it's the same. The mitzvah does not become his very being. The mitzvah is just a plate. Wird herumgenommen von der mitzvah. He becomes encompassed by this mitzvah, and the mitzvah beschützt him. The mitzvah protects him. Aber wird nicht miyuchad mit der mitzvah. He does not become unified. The mitzvah itself does not identify the very person himself, wie das is by Torah, the way it is by Torah. So therefore, this is the source that, just like by a Mizbeach, the golden plate is only a plate on the Mizbeach, so too by the Paishi Yisrael as well, the mitzvahs that they fulfill is only an external plate. The connection does not identify the very being of the person like with Torah, and yet it protects him from the fire of the Gehenna like it was with the Mizbeach. So this point there answers the question that the Rabbi asked before, that the emphasis of the Gemara before regarding the plate of the Mizbeach was how insignificant it is. How is that connected to Paisha Yisrael, where we're trying to say how strong the plate is, that the fire does not affect it? So the answer is, Adarabah, this is the whole point. We're trying to say that although Paisha Yisrael, the plate of the mitzvah, the protection of the mitzvah does not identify their very being, just like in the case of the Mizbeach, that the plate does not identify the being of the Mizbeach, it's bottled to the Mizbeach, but nevertheless, the fire still didn't affect the plate. And the same thing by the Paishi Yisrael, the fire of Gehenna still does not affect them. Alpizez, move on. This also answers the question. The Tam was the Eshtem so Grufmen Talmidei Chachamim. The first category, the ones that learn Torah, we refer to them as Talmidei Chachamim. Und dem Zweiten, the second category, we refer to them as Paishi Yisrael, the sinners of Israel. Even though both deserve, both the Talmidei Chachamim are also sinning and the Paishi Yisrael are also doing mitzvahs. The Baal by Talmidei Chachamim is Gufanesh. Since Talmidei Chachamim, when they learn Torah, their very being, their very body becomes one with the Torah, that they are fire. They can't be referred to as Paishi Yisrael. That's not their identity. Their identity is Torah. They could be they sinned as well, but their very identity is Torah. Nachmer, even more so, you're not allowed to give a Talmid Chacham such a title and embarrass him. Durch mevaze sein a Talmid Chacham is mevaze Torah. If you embarrass a Talmid Chacham, you're embarrassing the Torah itself. Warum we cannot uptailen dem Talmid Chacham from Torah? A Talmid Chacham and Torah become one being. If you embarrass a Talmid Chacham, you're embarrassing the Torah itself. Wie the Gemara sagt, the Gemara tells us, Talmid Chacham shesarach, a Talmid Chacham that sinned, ein mevazan leisa b'fehesya, not allowed to embarrass him publicly because you're embarrassing the Torah itself. The Far sagt the Gemara, so therefore the Gemara says, Talmidei Chachamim ein oyer shel Gehenim sheletes ben, that it's to the Talmidei Chachamim, that's their name, and the fire of Gehenim does not affect them. Und der Fun ist memele verstandig, as es haben bei sie passiert in Yonim, Bild to the Tzoyim, the very fact that they're in Gehenim, and we're speaking about the fact that Gehenim will not affect them, so you understand that they must have sinned. But the title that they have and deserve is Talmidei Chachamim, because that's the title is his real being, and you can't embarrass him by giving him another name. By contrast, simple people that don't learn Torah, they do mitzvahs, but they don't learn Torah. Although they're full of mitzvahs like the seeds of a pomegranate. Is maglach mizal zeh. So them it is possible to embarrass them with the avedas that they do. Und dabei nit onriren the mitzvahs was ze vermogen. And by embarrassing them and giving them this title of Paisha Yisrael, you're not touching and embarrassing the mitzvahs that they contain. Vadem zeir mitzvahs, zeir mitzias that is nit the mitzvahs. Their being, when you identify them and you call the person Paisha Yisrael, you're not affecting the mitzvahs, you're not identifying and embarrassing the mitzvahs that is contained in their being. There's their being that you refer to as Paisha Yisrael, and then they contain those mitzvahs in them. Says Nar Malay mitzvahs kanal. As we said before, they are full of mitzvahs, but the mitzvahs is not their very identity. Their very identity may still be Paisha Yisrael, that they're sinners. On the contrary, the Gemara is medayik zeyon tzuruf from Paisha Yisrael. The Gemara is specific to refer to them as the sinners und sie mevazah sein, and to embarrass them with this. Weil der bezoyin is atel von zer kapara. Embarrassing them with the avedas that they did is part of their atonement. Al derech wie the Gemara sagt, similar to something the Gemara says regarding Chizkiah and his father was a big Rasha, and when his father passed away, what did he do? Girer atzmis aviv, he dragged the bones of his father, al mitosh chavalim, on a bed of ropes in a very embarrassing way. He dragged his father that way to be buried in order to embarrass him, because he knew that it's for his benefit, to give him a kapara. So the same thing over here, referring to these Yidden, which have many mitzvahs, but referring to them as Paisha Yisrael is embarrassing them and providing them actually a kapara. So therefore this explains beautifully the difference between the title of Talmidei Chachamim and the title of Paisha Yisrael. So this is the conclusion of the explanation of the Gemara in Chagigah, all the details, the two statements of Rabbi regarding the Talmidei Chachamim and Rish Lakish regarding the Paisha Yisrael. The Rebbe still did not explain the order of the Gemara, which will come later in the Sikha, but for the most part, this is the conclusion of the explanation of the Gemara in Chagigah. Now we come back to the Mishkan and the two aspects of the Mishkan, which is the Shechina that dwells in the Mishkan and the Torah that dwells in the Oren. From the Maimer Azal that we quoted, Oster lemigdash v'shachanti b'seicham, b'seichai loy nemar ela b'seicham, that the Eibishter dwells not only in it, in the Mishkan, but also in every single Yid, b'seich kol echad v'echad mi Yisrael. It's verstandig, it's understood, as Punkt wie in the Mishkan haprati. Just like in every single Yid, you have these two things, these two connections of Torah and mitzvahs. In the Mishkan and Mikdash HaKlali. You have these two aspects also in the Beis HaMikdash or in the Mishkan in general. So the explanation of this is in the Tachlis from the Mishkan Mikdash and in da zwei days. Regarding the purpose of building the Mishkan or the Mikdash, there are two opinions about this. Das Ramban Kanal, the opinion of the Ramban, which was quoted in the beginning, as Ikra Chayfetz b'Mishkan, the main desire of Hashem in the Mishkan, hu Makkay Menuchas Hashchine Shua Aren. That's the place of the Aren where the Hashem dwells there in the Aren. Und das Rambam, but the opinion of the Rambam is, as das is Liyas Makriven by a Karbanis. The main point of building the Mishkan is a place where you can come and bring the Karbanis there. So seemingly an argument, what's the main point of the building of the Mishkan? However, we can say, as be'etzem is mara machado v'lei pligi, that really both of these opinions are not arguing; they're focusing on different aspects of what the Mishkan was built for, and they're both true. In the v'shachanti b'seicham in Mishkan zenedat zwei inyanim. In the point of bringing the Shechina down to dwell in the Mishkan, there are 2 points here. Aleph, number 1, in Mishkan zal zayin elokos begalui b'ofen pnimi, to have a revelation, and it should be fully permeated in the Mishkan, of a revelation of Hashem. Das heißt, an anofen von Yichud. And this Gilui in the Mishkan should be unified with the very entity of the Mishkan itself. That's one point. Beis, but then there's another point, the Ashras, Ashchina Zol Zayin B'Tachtainim, to bring the Shechina down into the lowest elements of the world in this over here, Tachtainim. Durch den Bitter von den Yanam Tachtainim Gashmiyim, by refining and elevating and bringing the lowest elements of the world, the physical of the world, Vidarenim for mitzvahs, like it is in general with all mitzvahs that you fulfill. Most of the mitzvahs are fulfilled through physical objects, the physical things in the world. So those are the 2 points in the Mishkan. Und das sind die zwei Inyanim von Arain und Karbanis Mishkan Bechlal. So these are the 2 aspects that the Ramban speaks about. The Arain, the Shechina that dwells in the Arain, and the Karbanis and the Mishkan in general, which the Rambam focuses on, the Karbanis that are brought there. So Aleph, the first point, which is in Arain, which is in Yinat Taira. The Arain, which is the place where the Taira was, is given Elokos Begali. There you had a full revelation of the Shechina there revealed. Like the Gemara describes, the space, the Arain, with the space where it was on, did not take up any space. Right? The Gemara tells us in a few places that the space of the Kodesh HaKadoshim was 20 by 20 amas. And if you measured from each side of the Arain, you would see that there were 10 amas on each side. But the Arain itself also took up space. The Arain itself was 2.5 amas by 1.5 amas. But how is it possible that if you measured from each side of the Arain, you had full 10 amas? So what space did the Arain take up? So the Gemara tells us, the Arain did not take up any space. So this point is a reflection of the full revelation of the Shechina that was there. As the mitzias from the Makken Gashmi Shela Arain, it was clear. You saw that the very place of where the physical Arain was is Elikus, was total godliness. Was not is nimna hanimnois. Only by Hashem is it impossible to say that there's any impossibilities for him. That's what this expression means. Nimnois means there are certain impossibilities. The example of this that's brought. It comes from the Tshuva of Rashba. So the example he says there is to say that a person could ride and he's riding on a donkey, and at the same time he's standing in one place. Impossible. Either he's riding on a donkey or he's standing in one place. You could have a miracle where things happen supernaturally, but 2 opposites to take place at the very same time, that's an impossibility. That's what nimnois means, impossibilities. But Hashem is nimna nimnois. There is nothing that's impossible. Even impossibilities are also possible for Hashem. So over here, this concept of makim ha'arein einem in amida is an expression of 2 opposites at the same time. Why is that? Because amasayim v'chetzi v'gaimer. On one hand, the arein had to take up space. If it doesn't have the specific space, the specific size of what the arein was, so then it's not an arein. It has to have that space to be the holy arein. But at the same time, when you measured from each side of the arein, you saw full 10 amas, and the arein did not take up any space. So at the very same time, you must have the 2 opposites, the space that it requires for the arein, and the fact that it had no space. This is the special unity that the very unlimited entity of Hashem becomes part and parcel with the limitation of the shape and the existence of the Aron itself. They become both one and the same thing, 2 opposites together. That's a full yichud. That's the full union that takes place in this space where the Aron is. That's one aspect of the Beis HaMikdash. But then there's another point, the bringing of the karbanis, and azayech the mishkan b'chalusa, or in general the whole mishkan. Was mat genommen Yud Gimel or Tezvav Dvarim Gashmiyim, they took the 13 or 15 different materials, physical materials, and von ze gemacht am Mikdash for the Meibishn, and they built of this a Mikdash for Hashem. What this accomplishes is, even if not with the full intense revelation like it was in the Araim, but here the point is to draw down and to bring the Mishkan into Tachtainim, into the lowest place. Al derech der bitter von dvarim gashmim al yedei kiyam mitzvahs. Similar to what mitzvahs in general accomplish, that you're refining and reaching the physical in the fulfillment of a mitzvah. Was hagam moichen der mishkan b'chlal by karbanis befrat is given gili alakus. Even though in the karbanis and in the Mishkan in general, you had revelation of godliness in all of the Mishkan, not only in the Aron. As we know, Chazal tell us of the miracles that occurred in the Beis HaMikdash. You had the fire on the Mizbeach that came down from heaven and so on. Es ist aber dort nicht gewähnt beäufen, but it was not to the extent as der Guf HaMetzias von die Dvarim Gashmiyim is geworden Elokos, that the very entity, the very existence of the physical Mizbeach or all the other materials in the Beis HaMikdash itself became godly, became unified to the point that it's Einem and Amidah, that it did not take up any space. To that extent, the Gilui and the Yichud is not to that extent. So those are the two aspects of the revelation that there is in the Beis HaMikdash. What the Ramban is focusing on, the full revelation in the Arain, and what the Rambam is focusing on, which is bringing the Shekhinah down to the lowest aspects of existence, the Tachtainim and all the materials and the Karbanis in the Beis HaMikdash. Move on. So according to this, we understand was the Medrashim Anal Betchilas HaSicha. The Medrashim that was quoted in the beginning of the Sicha, sind Mechalek zwischen dem Arain und dem Klalas HaMishkan. Why? It separates between the Shechina and the Teire that's in the Arain and the Shechina that's in the Mishkan in general. Chach, in allgemein, even though generally speaking, is Menuchas v'Ashras HaShechina b'Mishkan given in and durch dem Arain. Even though generally speaking, it's all one and the same thing. The Shechina that's in the Mishkan is in and through the Arain. Because in detail you can divide it. It's two different aspects to the Shechina that dwells in the Beis HaMikdash, as we've just explained there. Aleph, the first point is Achsanya la'atzmi. The Lashon HaMedrash says this is a lodging, this is a place for Hashem Himself to dwell. Was das is der Amshachas HaShechina in die Dvarim Gashmiyim from Mishkan. This is bringing down the Shechina in the entire Mishkan, including all the materials and the physical aspect and the existence of the Mishkan. On Avodas HaKarbanis v'chulu, including, as the Rambam says, the main point of the Mishkan is the Karbanis. Was di achsanye, so this place for Hashem to be is al derech der inyan mitzvahs. This is similar to what mitzvahs b'chlal accomplish, since der Verbund zwischen Elokos mit Welt, connecting godliness to the lowest aspects of the existence of the world. An achsanye v'dire b'olam haza gashmi, a dwelling, a home for Hashem in the physical aspects of the world. That's one point of what was accomplished in the building of the Mishkan, which is related to what we spoke about before regarding the Paisha Yisrael, that their main Maila is that they're fully contained, Malaya Mitzvahs Kirima, the focus of the Maila of the Mitzvahs. Then Beis, but then there's another point, Achsanya LeTeire, a place, a home for the Teire. The Ashras, Ashchine, this is in Arein. The extent that the Shechina dwells in the Arein, which is to a much greater extent. Was in them is da a mile von Yichud. Here you have a tremendous advantage that you have the union between Hashem and the very space of the Mishkan here, in the Arein. Was Halakusa Yizbarach, the godliness is miyuchad mit an Arein, becomes completely unified with the Arein, u'makam Arein einem in amid the canal, to the point that the space of the Arein itself took up no space. Was das is bedugmas hamayla von Talmidei Chachamim. So this is similar to what we spoke about before regarding the effect that Torah has when a Talmid Chacham learns Torah. As durch Torah werd gufanesh. When a Talmid Chacham learns Torah, it transforms and it permeates the entire being of the person, that he becomes a piece of fire. The same thing over here. The entire Arein became a piece of godliness that it's Einem and Amidah, took up no space. Rabbi goes a step deeper here now, that in the month Chiluk, this above mentioned difference zwischen Teire and mitzvahs in Zeir Pu'ula in the Mikdash Prati, the effect that Teire and mitzvahs has in the Mikdash Prati, every individual Yid, das heißt, in dem Yiden, was lernt Teire, und is Mekai mitzvahs, regarding the Yid that learns Teire and fulfills mitzvahs, and azayech in Mikdash HaKlali, and so also too in the general Mikdash, in the world, the two aspects of the Mikdash HaKlali, kommt mit dem Chiluk von Teire und Mitzvahs, wie sie sind verbunden und miyuchad mit Elokos. The source of this is all really in the Teire and Mitzvahs itself, in their connection, in the connection of Teire to its source, to the Eibishter himself, and the connection of a mitzvah to its source in godliness. If Teire states, so regarding Teire, the expression that it says in the Zayar and quoted in Tanya is, Ay reise v'kutshebricho kol achad. Hashem and Teire are all one. Das heißt, Teire and Elokos is eins. Teire and godliness is one. Nicht wie a Sach, was ist verbunden mit noch a Sach. We're not talking about, the expression used here is not of two entities that are very strongly connected to one another. Nas is chad. The expression used here is that it's simply one. It says ein mitzias. The Teire is one with the source, with Hashem himself. This is Hashem's chachma itself. One with Hashem himself. By contrast, when it comes to mitzvahs, was then in Ratzon Elyon, it's the will of Hashem. The Zohar refers to them as the limbs of the king. Just like the limbs of a body, is then embottled some nefesh. Even though the limbs, so the movement and the actions of the limbs are completely subservient to the soul that has the will and the desire that controls all the movements of the limbs of the body. But nevertheless, the chayis that there is in the evarim and the movement that there is not one with the soul itself. There's the soul that has a desire, and that desire sends a message to the limb, and that controls the limb, and immediately, instinctively, a person will make a movement with the limb. But nevertheless, it's two different entities. There's the Aver, and there's the Melech. There's the soul, and then there's the life force from the soul that comes into the limb of the body. Inyan mitzvahs is an onzog zu a mention. What's the mitzvahs? Those are the commands of Hashem to the people to fulfill. Nid vi Teire, and unlike Teire, was sie is faran euch ede the mensch lernen say. Unlike Teire, Teire is Hashem's chachma. Whether there are people that are going to learn this chachma, people that are not going to learn this chachma, it's Hashem's chachma. It's His. It's one with Hashem Himself. Whereas a mitzvah is Hashem commanding people. In other words, it's a level in godliness which is already to some extent an entity for itself, relating to people that Hashem is commanding them. So therefore, the bittul, the connection of the mitzvahs to their source, for Hashem Himself, where they come from, is not to the same extent as the yichud, as the union that there is of Torah and Hashem Himself, where it's one. This is Hashem's chachma Himself. On the far, so that this is really the source, which results also in the different level of connection of Torah and mitzvahs that it creates in the person. Shas a Yid learn Torah, when a Yid learns Torah, which is Chachmasi Yisbarach, Hashem's wisdom, was his eins mit Elokos, and the Torah is one with its source, with godliness. Peilt es eich beim Yidden, so this also affects a Yid in the same way. Dveikus v'yichud mit Torah and Elokos. That when a Yid learns Torah, this becomes his very being, this becomes his understanding, and he becomes completely one and unified with the Torah that he learns, which is one and unified with Hashem Himself. Aber, by contrast, b'shas a Yid is mekayim a mitzvah, when a Yid fulfills a mitzvah, und tut dem Ratzim v'tzivi von dem Eibishten, and he's fulfilling Hashem's will and Hashem's command, but das is a tzivi in a bafel zum Yidden. So mitzvahs are not one with Hashem Himself. It's bottled to Hashem. It's a command of Hashem, but it's not one with Hashem. So poiltas a bittul of dimensions. So the effect on the Yid is also the same. That when a Yid follows and fulfills a mitzvah, so then this brings about in a person the impact is a bittul, that he's subservient, that he annuls himself to Hashem. A person annuls himself and fulfills the will of Hashem. But when a Yid fulfills a mitzvah, he does not become one and unified, that this becomes his very entity in the mitzvah that he fulfills. So this is a deeper explanation in the difference between the effect of Torah and mitzvahs on the person, where the source of this is. Like then, according to this, we'll understand much clearer and much deeper, from Vayakhel beseicham, afille nar in dem Chelek von zu machen, adirle is barach b'tachteinem, fadet sich sei der Inyan von Torah and sei der Inyan von mitzvahs. That when it comes to the Vayakhel beseicham, and the fact that the Vayakhel beseicham creates a dir b'tachteinem, so this requires two different aspects. It requires a fulfillment of mitzvahs, and it also requires the learning of Torah. These are both very, very integral to fulfilling the full dir b'tachteinem. The kavane was nesava kadosh baruch hu liyas leizbarach dir b'tachteinem. So Hashem's desire to create a dwelling in this world, in the lowest aspect of this world, is doch. So it includes two things here. Is as atzmusa yisbarach, the very essence of Hashem, zol sheire sein dolamata, should dwell here below by lamhaza atachten shein tachten lamata mimenu, in the very lowest elements of existence in this world. Und auf dem darf man haben zwei Sachen. So therefore we have over here two different elements to this, that are two different points. Aleph, an Inyan, you have to have something was on mamshach sein atzmusi yisbarach, to draw down the very essence of Hashem. And Beis, an Inyan was poiled as the amshacha soll sein b'tachteinem. But then you also have to have something that will reach very low, come down to the lowest elements of the world. So you have to have both ends, both extremes. You have to have something that can reach and connect to the very essence of Hashem Himself, and yet at the same time bring it down to the very lowest elements in the world here below. Das ist der Chelek zwischen Teire und Mitzvahs. This is the difference between what's accomplished by learning Teire and fulfilling mitzvahs. Both of them are integral for creating the Dira Lo Yizbarach B'Tachtainim. Teire, so when it comes to learning Teire, since Hashem and His Teire is all one, is al yada hamshachas atzmusay. So when a person learns Teire, so here he draws down the very essence of Hashem, because the Teire is one with Hashem. As piled up in it, however, but what's still missing here in the learning of Teire, it does not affect as atzmusi yizbarach zal nimshach v'erem b'tachtainim, that the learning of Teire should bring Hashem down all the way to the lowest elements of the world. Because even after the Torah descends here below, the Torah that we learn in this world and talks about and deals with all the situations and physical things of this world, is the hecher slapshus in dvarim tachtainim gashmim. But the Torah itself is not directly enclosed, and you don't engage with the physical itself when you learn the Torah. So yes, when you learn Torah, you're drawing down the chachma and the essence of Hashem Himself in Torah, but it doesn't reach to the gashmis of the world. By contrast, when a person fulfills mitzvahs, here you reach and you also bring the other aspect of the tachtainim. They are the limbs of the king. When this descends here below, they come down and apply and are fulfilled in the physical world. On the contrary, thus is kol inyan mitzvahs. This is the whole point of mitzvahs. Nemin dvarim tachtainim gashmiyim, to take the lowest physical objects of the world, and to bring about in them a refinement and a purification through the mitzvah. So through a mitzvah, what you accomplish is that the essence of Hashem that you brought into this world through Teire, it should come down and reach and dwell even in the lowest aspects of the world. That's why you have to have both Teire and mitzvahs for the creation of a dira lo yizbarach through Teire and b'tachtainim through mitzvahs. According to this, it's also understood the hemshech und die sheiches von die beide memres was ein ershel gehenem sheletas b'talmidei chachamim und b'peishi Yisrael to the sugya. Now, going back to the Gemara in Chagigah, where it brings both statements regarding the Talmud Chacham, the mile of learning Torah, that the fire of Ganem doesn't affect them, and then the Paishi Yisrael, and the fact that since they do mitzvahs, the fire doesn't affect them, and the connection to the Gemara before, und das was beide Memres bringen sich, Dafke and Masechta Chagigah, why are both of these statements brought specifically here in Masechta Chagigah, or not in Masechta Erevin, and it's not quoted in Masechta Erevin. Der Teichen von beiden Memres is, the content, the point of both of these statements is, as man darf sich misbeinen sein, beprate advarim, that you should pay attention to the details of what a person is accomplishing, und demol zetmen, and then you'll see, as by Yidden, sei Talmidei Chachamim, und sei Peishi Yisrael, that whether you're dealing with Talmidei Chachamim that are sinning, or Peishi Yisrael that are sinning, then in the Avedas shebehem, to the Avedas that they've done, not at tzipui or not davatafal aleim. It's only a cover, a plate that's secondary, that's outside, it's external. On the Ikke shebehem, the primary being of who they are is Taiv u'kedusha, is goodness and holiness. That's the main point that the Gemara here is saying. That you may see a person that's sinning and you may say, oh, this is who he really is, and this is therefore the Gehenna will affect him, but it doesn't, because that's not really the real being of the person. Und das kommt bei Hemshech zu der Sugya frier. This is following what the Gemara discusses before, benegei the Mizbachais in the Mikdash, regarding the Mizbachais that's in the Beis HaMikdash, as a candidate mevatel sein kein tumme, that they cannot, they cannot mekabel sein kein tumme. They are not susceptible to becoming tamei lihiyos, since as a hasbainus in the prati advarim bavais. Because if you look at really what the entity of the Mizbeach is, so you look at the Mizbeach, if you just look at the Mizbeach, what do you see? You see gold, you see copper. Those are metals that are susceptible to tumah. But if you pay attention, you'll see that the gold or the copper is only a plate. It's not really the true being of the Mizbeach. And therefore you'll see that this plate is not the main thing, and it's really annulled. It's bottled to the Mizbeach itself, and the Mizbeach itself is made up of eights, or it's Adama, as the Gemara there says, that it's considered to be part of the Adama, and therefore does not become Tomei, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yezer. This is, the Rebbe explained all of this, these two paragraphs here, in the Sikha that we learned in Trume Dalet, before over here in the Sefer. So now the point is, as an ashras hashchina b'mishkan zenada di beide inyanim. So since by bringing down the shchina in the mishkan, you have both of these aspects. Inyanat Torah and inyanat mitzvahs. The Torah, which brings down the essence of Hashem, and the mitzvahs, which brings down Hashem into the lowest aspects, into the tachtainim of the world. The Rebbe bring the Gemara behemshach lezeh. So continuing from the Gemara before, which is talking about the Beis HaMikdash in general and the Mizbeach and the Beis HaMikdash. So continuing to this, the Gemara brings down by the Mikdash HaPrati shebekol echad vechad miYisrael regarding the individual Beis HaMikdash and every single Yid as oich b'Mikdash zeh, that also in the Mikdash of every single Yid zenen da the beide inyanim from Torah and mitzvahs. You have both of these aspects of Torah and mitzvahs. Was das is der Iker von jeder von sei. And this is the main being of who Yid is, by Talmid Chachamim and by Peishi Yisrael, whether he's a Talmid Chacham or Peishi Yisrael. Und das kann nicht bottle werden an der Averis. And the Torah Yid learns, or the mitzvahs that Yid fulfills, cannot become bottled through the Averis that will happen. Which is only an external cover on the real being of who they are. So it's dafka over here in the sugya of Chagige, where it talks about the Beis HaMikdash, that it brings both of these integral aspects of the Ashras, Hashchina, of Torah and mitzvahs. Whereas in the Gemara in Eruvin, where it's the sugya talking about Gehenim, so there it's not important to bring both details that are integral to the Ashras, Hashchina of Torah and mitzvahs. As I move on with this, we could also understand the Seder, the order of how this is quoted. One of the questions that Rebbe asked in the beginning was that it would seem more appropriate to bring Rish Lakish first, which is discussing the Kal V'chomer from the Mizbeach. Why does the Gemara bring first the Kal V'chomer that Rabbi brings, which is learned from the Salamandra of the fire? First, the Gemara quotes the Kal V'chomer regarding Talmidei Chachamim, und erst danach wegen Peishi Yisrael, and only afterwards regarding Peishi Yisrael that fulfill mitzvahs. Hagam, as in the Gemara verteman, Mizbeach Hazav erst, by the zweite Memre benegei Peishi Yisrael, even though the Mizbeach Hazav is only brought up in the second statement, and that's seemingly the connection to before. Falazoi is the Seder B'chlal, because these two integral aspects in a person's Aveda and bringing and making the Dira B'tachtainim in the world, so this is the order of how it has to be done. Limud, Mevi L'dei Maisa. First is learning Torah, and the learning of Torah then leads to action. And also regarding bringing down the Shechina, whether in the general Beis HaMikdash or in the individual Beis HaMikdash in every single Yid, this is the order. First, the Yid learns Torah, and Torah is one with Hashem Himself. You draw down the very essence of Hashem Himself. And then you continue with the fulfillment of mitzvahs, and you draw down the essence of the Eibishter b'tachtainim, in the lowest aspects of the world, which follows afterwards al yedei mitzvahs, through the mitzvahs that a person fulfills in the world. This Sikha, the Rebbe said, as you see, it was said in Chaf Menachemov, Tafshin Lamed Aleph. It was that year, when starting from Chamishasa B'Shvat, Tafshin Lamed Aleph, the Rebbe began speaking very strongly about conquering the whole world with Limudat Torah. And the entire year, the Rebbe spoke about the Maila of Limudat Torah. So this Sikha is also going with the same theme that Elvo and Chassidus, it always tells us how the mitzvahs is the main thing that makes the Dira B'tachtainim, that reaches the lowest aspects of the world, but nevertheless, the Limudat Torah is also a very, very important ingredient to make the Dira B'tachtainim, because the point of the Dira B'tachtainim is to reach the very essence of Hashem, which is dafka through Limudat Torah, and only with the combination of the two, of Limudat Torah and Kiyam HaMitzvahs, and in the proper order of Limud Mevi L'dei Maisa, are you able to fulfill and make the Dira B'tachtainim. And there's also a very important Ha'ara 57, where the Rebbe talks about the fact that Dafka Torah is what reaches to Atzmos, even though in many other places it says that it's Dafka through mitzvahs. You can take a look in Ha'ara 57.